Well, in order to get started here, would you like to see your tests now or wait till the end of class?
No.
No?
Yeah.
Is that a consensus pretty much? Okay. All right, so the average in this class was not bad. In this class, it was a 78.4% was the average grade on this test, which is, again, I'm fine with that. In terms of A's, B's, C's, D's, and F's, there were 4 A's in this class. 4 is 10. There were 3 F's in this class. There were 2 D's, there were 3 B's, and there was 1 C. A total of 13. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So, I'll get you these tests back right now, and you can take a look at them for a few minutes, of course, ask me any questions you might have. And then do let me know, I will be collecting these tests back, so just so you know. Okay. So, I don't know that there was a particular section that was tougher than the others across the board. It just kind of varied among students. Hopefully, when you have your test there, if you got something wrong, hopefully, if I put the correct answer in, that's terrific. If I didn't, and you want to know the correct answer, you can certainly see me after class. If you have a particular question about something that you think is an individual type question, you can also ask me that after class. But if you have any kind of general question, just general concern or something you're not sure about, you can certainly ask that now. That would be fine. The intervals on the first page were kind of hit and miss. Second page was also a little hit and miss. And third page. Yeah. I actually though, I forget if it was this class or the next class, but I was relatively pleased about the figured base. I must say, section 2D, that was overall, I thought, better than I thought it was going to be. Better than I expected, so that was good. And there were even some good section 2D on the popular part symbols. There were some really good papers that had that very accurate too. So that was pleasing and that was encouraging to see as well. Yeah, and then the chart in section 4, the very last thing, that was just basically if you have memorized that or not. So, trying to look at some other people's tests while you're looking at yours just to see if there's something that caught my attention. Again, it was really nice to see that there were 8 A's, B's, and C's in this class. It was very good. Happy to see that. And even the D's I'm not too concerned about because I think the people that got the D's, I think your overall course grade is still in good shape. So I'm not concerned about that. the Fs that kind of really tanked, which brings the overall course grade down pretty much. So. Does anyone want to see any of these problems again? Does anyone have any questions or concerns? There is only one more test in this class, and that's the final exam. And when I give you your third and your last assignment sheet, we'll talk about when that is and how that's going to work. Yes?
For the third exam, is that going to be over everything or just the stuff from here on?
Yeah, I believe, I just want to double check what I put in the syllabus, because I'm sure I put it there if I put it at all. Yeah, I believe the last test of the final exam of this class is not comprehensive, which means it should just cover what we talk about from today until the end of the semester. Yes, okay, so if, can I come around and collect these again then? If you have any chance? Oh, we got a big roadblock.
Question?
Yes.
What time is our final exam going to be then? Do we know the day yet?
I do. Can you hang on until I distribute this assignment sheet? I think it should be printed on there.
It's January the 12:30 on November 24th.
Oh, thank you. Talk about instant information.
Did you hear that?
Yeah.
So without further ado, let me get you this last one. The everything is on the front that you need. The final examiners had to be on the back because I couldn't fit it. So that's the only thing on the back. So this should take us up to the end of the semester. Since I would say we're a little over 2/3 of the way through now. So in this third and final unit of the course, we are going to focus on two main things, and that's all, because there's a lot of information regarding these two things. One of those things is called voice leading, also known as part writing. And the other main thing that we're going to focus on towards the end of this unit, or we're going to get to something called non-chord tones. We're going to learn ways to explain notes that do not belong in the harmony that we see in music. Yes, believe it or not, unfortunately, there are stray notes sometimes that do not belong in the harmonies. So we'll deal with those towards the end of the unit. And then, as you can see on the very back side, I think this class's final exam is Tuesday, November 24th from 10:30 to 12:30, which to me isn't so bad. It's not the last day of finals, first of all, and it's not like some ungodly hour like 8 in the morning or, like 5 in the evening or something like that. So you guys, I think you got a pretty good deal this semester, at least your section. The other section's okay too. I know I have one class, not related to this class at all, and their final exam is Wednesday at like 3:30 in the afternoon. Whoa. So they got a bum deal on that one. So just go ahead and hang on to this, of course. If I make any changes, or if we have any, heaven forbid, if we have any snow days, I guess I'll have to let you know. You can see your assignments are on the right there in bold as we go to the end. And, I guess because we meet 3 times a week in this class, it looks like there's still a fair amount, although there really isn't. When you look at your oral skills assignment sheet, we only meet twice a week there, and there's not too many classes left of that already. So, let me know if you have questions, of course, about this. Gianna, can I give you one of these?
Oh, that'd be great.
And I don't know that anyone else here needs one, and it's here. Trying to stay on top of things. Okay, so you've got your final assignment sheet. We've briefly looked at the tests, got those back. I guess it's time to start talking about voice leading. There's a lot of information you need to understand and learn about voice leading. And thankfully, we have several mini classes to go over this. But some of our next, including today's class, will probably be pretty full, chock full of new information. Let me start out by saying there's a fancy term in music called voice leading. Another name for that, which means the same thing, is called part writing. And, well, I'm trying to think if the book considers that one word or two words. I don't know how to look at it. I guess the book calls it two words. Separate words. Voice leading is kind of more accurate term to me. It explains kind of what it is in its meaning. Voice leading, we're talking about how to take multiple voices in such a way that they move and they can connect to other notes in successive chords. Let me see if I can give you more of an official description of that. Voice leading, I guess I could say, or part writing it's an art, actually. It's the art of connecting chords to one another. Connecting chords to one another. Last unit, we spent a lot of time spelling, learning, understanding, building all these kinds of chords, triads and seventh chords and their inversions. But this unit, we're going to deal with ways that a composer decides to write and shape individual lines, producing chords in the process. So this is probably a kind of a crude diagram, but we're going to be working from now until you're done with theory. We're going to be working with something called a four-voice chorale style. We're going to be working in 4 parts, and each one of those parts kind of has its own distinct contour, shape, or melody. And as these parts move along independently, we get actual harmonies or chords that they create when they come in simultaneously with each other. We get chords in the process. So, in a sense, I'd like you to, last unit we spent so much time talking about the vertical dimension of music. That is, we're just building from the bottom up, okay? The up and down. But in this unit of music theory, I'd like to focus more on the horizontal dimension of music. That is, how each individual voice moves, kind of where it goes, its shape, its particular contour, that kind of thing. And as multiple voices move horizontally, they sound harmonies, they build harmonies and create harmonies together when they sound at the same time. Okay. So the horizontal dimension of music, I was going to say mucus, that would not be good. The horizontal dimension of music is really what my focus is going to be for the next several weeks here. Okay, so the notes of chords you need to know, they're not written haphazardly on a staff. They're not just splattered randomly up there. Composers and musicians, they don't write that way. Thought must be put into connecting the notes in a smooth and satisfying way to produce chords. And when I say smooth, and I'll repeat this several times over the next few weeks, when I say smooth, I mean that the notes move either by step, or they leap by small leaps, like leaps of a third from one chord to the next, or sometimes they don't move at all. Sometimes notes can remain on the same pitch that they're in one chord, which will also they'll occur in another chord as well. So when I say we want to have the 4 individual voices moving smoothly, that means they're going to be moving as little as possible. Okay, they will have to move sometime, but we will be moving them as little as possible so we get smooth connections. Okay, and then voice leading, I guess you could say, is really the study of controlling. It's the study of controlling the horizontal motion of all these voices. And virtually every theory curriculum and textbook in this country teaches voice leading using a 4-voice or a 4-part texture. I mean, you could go to, well, we're in the middle of the country, so we're not an extreme, but I mean, you can go over to California or Alaska, you could go over to Florida or Maine or whatever, and they would still teach voice leading. Probably 99% of the schools would teach voice leading using a 4-part texture. 4-part texture. So for now, we need to establish some basic principles about chords written in 4 voices. Okay, 4 voices is going to be the standard. You'll get really used to this in the coming weeks and especially in coming semesters. But the 4 voices we use to part write music are, well, does anyone know what they're called?
Soprano, alto, tenor, bass.
That's right, soprano, alto, tenor, bass. And if you just look at this first half note chord here on the grand staff, the highest note here is referred to as the soprano note or the soprano voice. This note here belongs to the alto voice. This note here belongs to the tenor voice. And the lowest note here belongs to the bass voice. Very often these 4 voices are abbreviated. You may have heard in choirs SATB. That's very common. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Now, one thing that looks maybe a little bit new or novel about the notation is this. Even though we're going to be working with 4 voices, we're only going to be using 2 staves. Okay? So each voice is not going to get its own individual or separate step. What we're going to do is we're going to combine and write both the soprano and the alto voices on the treble staff, and they will share the treble staff always. Okay? The tenor and the bass voices, however, they are going to be written on the bass clef staff, and they will share that staff together always. Okay? Now, when the soprano and alto voices, when you have 2 voices sharing the same staff, the stem direction rule that we learned in Unit 1 of this class kind of goes out the window. Okay? In order to visually see and distinctly separate the 2 voices that share the same staff, notes in the soprano voice will always have their stems pointing up, and notes in the alto voice will always have their stems pointing down. It doesn't matter how far away the notes are from the middle staff line like we learned in the first unit. It's just always a default. Alto voice notes, stem goes down. Soprano voice notes, stem always goes up. Doesn't matter where in the staff they are. Same thing is true for tenor and bass. The tenor notes, they will always be written in the bass clef, and they will always have their stems pointing up. The bass notes will always have their stems pointing down, regardless of where they are in the staff. So again, so that we can see at a visual, at a glance, we can see a clear distinction between what note is in what voice. So we'll be able to tell that very easily with stems notated that way. Okay? It doesn't even matter how high the tenor voice gets. For this particular style, what's called a 4-part chorale style, for this particular style, the tenor notes are always going to be notated with respect to the bass clef staff. So we'll find out later that the tenor, they can actually sing up this high, but that's okay. We're going to have to notate them with ledger lines in connection with the bass staff. We never write the tenor notes in the treble staff, not in this style. Now, you may, in some other classes, like in your keyboard class, you may find tenor notes written up here, but that's a different animal altogether. Okay? So let's talk a little bit more about the notation here. I've already talked about stem directions and pointing and all that. I've talked about the tenor voice, that it's always notated on the bass staff no matter how high it gets. You'll notice that when a triad is written across the grand staff in 4 voices, right? Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. How many different notes does a triad have? It only has 3 unique notes, right? But we have 4 voices, 4 parts to write a triad in. So what we're going to find out is that a triad, when it's written in 4 voices, one of its 3 pitches always must be duplicated or doubled. That's the official term, it's doubled. And for now, I just want you to remember that whenever you write a triad over the span of 4 voices, I'd like you to duplicate or double the root of the triad. Okay? So for instance, in this first given picture here, it's a C major triad. It's C, it's E, and it's G. But you notice how the root, the C, is doubled? You see I've got 2 C's in this chord. One happens to be in the soprano, and one happens to be in the bass. That's what it means when I duplicate or double a pitch or a tone in a chord. It means there's 2 instances of that pitch in the chord. And there's only 1 instance of the other chord members in the other voices. Okay. So I would say the C, the root of this chord, is doubled because there's an instance of it in the bass and there's an instance of it in the soprano. And there's only 1 instance of the chord's third, the alto has the E. And there's only 1 instance of the chord's fifth, the G, and the tenor has that. Okay? So for now, double the root of all triads that you're writing in 4 voices. Okay. Another thing about notation quickly is that adjacent voices sometimes share a note. And that's okay. Adjacent voices may share the identical or the same pitch in the same octave. And when the same pitch is shared between adjacent voices, we have a little bit of, special ways that we notate that. So, for instance, by the way, what does adjacent mean? Yeah, right next to each other, okay? So adjacent voices would be, examples would be soprano and alto, those are adjacent voices. Alto and tenor, you are adjacent voices. And bass and tenor, you are adjacent voices as well in this setup, in this combination. Notice in the second chord that I have in this measure, do you see how the tenor and the bass are sharing the exact same pitch? That's okay. Adjacent voices are allowed to share and sing the same pitch sometimes in this style. But notice that I only write the note head once. And I have a down stem to show that basses are on this pitch, and I have the stem pointing up to also show that the tenors are on this pitch as well. The double stemming on this single pitch makes it clear that 2 voices, 2 parts, are on that middle C. Okay. You might, yes, go ahead.
If the alto and the tenor show the same pitch, do you say that both sides of them?
Okay, yeah, I was going to get to that, but that's fine. Let's get to it right now. Take a look at this chord and this measure here. You see how we've got E, middle C, and G. You see how the alto and the tenor are sharing? They're on the same pitch, that is C4. When the alto and the tenor, when those particular adjacent voices share the same pitch, we have to write the pitch twice because the alto is written always in one clef and the tenor is written in another clef. I can understand that someone may think this, like you may think, well, if the alto and the tenor are both on middle C, why can't we do something like this? Isn't that clear enough? Looks like a flying saucer or something to me. No, you can't write it that way. Okay? When the alto and tenor, since they use different clefs, when those 2 voices, adjacent voices in particular, are on the same pitch, you have to write the pitch twice. Once with respect to the treble clef, and once with respect to the bass clef. One for alto, one for tenor. What happens when we don't have, let's say the rhythm of the chord that you're writing at the moment is not a half note, quarter note, or smaller. Let's say it's a whole note larger and it doesn't require a stem. How do you show this then? Let's say the tenor and the bass are on the same pitch.
It's like the second line we have to write it twice.
Yeah, that's right. So when you have whole notes and the tenor and the bass or the soprano and the alto share the same pitch, you have to write 2 whole notes side by side. So because the stems don't show that multiple voices or parts are on the same pitch, showing 2 notes side by side will indicate that. Because if I just have this, and you say, oh no, look, the tenor and the bass they're all singing the middle C. I'm like, it looks like a voice has dropped out. A part is missing. So to be clear, when you have whole notes, you need to do that when no stems are involved. Okay. Let me pause for a second here. It's a fair amount of information. It's just basic notation, the way you write things when you're dealing with 4 parts, 2 parts sharing a staff. Are there any questions about notation concerns? Yeah.
Can the alto part be on top of the soprano part or never?
No, it cannot, and we'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, we'll get to that before we're done. Yeah. In fact, we could just say generally we don't want to have any of the parts cross an adjacent voice. In other words, I don't ever want to have the tenor notated lower than the bass, or this, which is the same thing as the bass being higher than the tenor. I don't want that. And I never want the altos to be above the sopranos or vice versa. Okay, we don't want the parts to cross their particular region that they inhabit in the staff. Yes.
Is that just specifically in this style? Because I know there's pieces where altos do go higher than the soprano.
Yeah, it is kind of specific a little bit to this style. There are other styles where parts are allowed to cross. But in general, for those of you that are in women's choir or even concert choir, in general, your particular part doesn't really, I mean, it may once in a while, but it's not supposed to, and it doesn't frequently cross a higher or a lower part that's next to your part. It may for a few beats or something like that, but it kind of depends on the style. Generally, we like to keep each of their voices within their respective range, within their respective region on the staff. Okay, now, let's talk a little bit about some spacing issues. When chords are written on a staff in 4 parts, like I have here, the overall vertical spacing of the notes in the chord is always going to be one of 2 types. So basically what I'm going to tell you now in the next few minutes is just like factual information. It's just factual information. When you write in 4 parts, the overall spacing of the chord is going to be one of 2 types. It's either going to be in something called close structure, or it's going to be in something called open structure. Close structure and open structure. And I think, yeah, I've got an example on the board here to show. This is just factual information. You just need to know when you look at how the 4 voices of a chord are spaced. Okay? Close structure is a type of structure. It talks kind of about how densely the chord is packed, how close the voices are to each other. In close structure, there is less than an octave between the soprano and the tenor voices. Okay. If I can abbreviate it like that. Close structure is that type of spacing where there is less than an octave of space between the soprano and the tenor. Now I know the soprano and tenor are not right next to each other, but you take 2 voices that aren't really right next to each other and you give them kind of limits or, well, you just give them certain boundaries and things like that, and that'll talk about the overall density of the chord. So, let's take a look at this chord right here. You see how it's a G major chord. G, B, D, and then the G, the root is double. Let's take a look. How close or far apart are the soprano and the tenor? This one and this one. Are they less than an octave apart technically? Yeah, they are, because this is D4, right, and this is B4, not after. So, because there's less than an octave of space between these 2 pitches, the soprano and tenor, we would say that this chord is an example of close structure. Close structure. Let's look at the other chord in the same measure. It's still a G major chord, GBD, with the G duplicated. How far apart are the soprano and the tenor notes now? Are they an octave or more apart from each other? Yes, and so in that case, this is referred to as open structure. so we can define open structure as an octave or more of space between the soprano and the tenor. An octave or greater between soprano and tenor. Now, I want you to know that it's not a rule, it's not a guideline. Both types of structures are used, both types of structures are legal, they're used all the time. You can use them with complete freedom. It's not like one has to be used more than another or one is better than another. I'm just telling you some factual information, that's all this is. It's not a rule that you have to follow. It's not a guideline. It just happens to be, can you identify the structure of a four-part chord in this four-part style by looking at the space between the soprano and the tenor? That's all it is. Open structure versus closed structure. I'm going to, if I have a moment here, turn the TV on. There is an example in your book on, by the way, we're in chapter 5. We're starting chapter 5 in your textbook now. Chapter 5 is all about the principles of voice leading. There you go. And I want to show you, there's an example on page 71 in your textbook. And it actually just calculates or analyzes all the types of structure of all these chords here in the four voices. You see how in this example 5.8 that some of the chords at the beginning, well, most of the chords at the beginning are in closed structure, some in the middle are in open structure, and then some at the end are in closed structure again. And you probably can't see it very well, but I think all the soprano notes and all the tenor notes are highlighted in light green, so you can just compare those two voices to see whether or not those voices are an octave or more or less apart. And again, it's not a rule. You don't have to follow anything here. It's just a fact about the spacing, the general density of spacing, vertical spacing of these chords. Okay? So, let's go ahead and listen to this. Actually, I should say, the way a chord is spaced has a great deal of influence on its aural effect. It really does. And so lots of care and study have been taken when you're writing with four parts to get the spacing to be just right so it's as clear and sonorous as it can be. Some of you have probably heard this piano, although this piano is getting more out of tune by the week. What do we do with the fermata? Do we just blow past it?
Hold for as long as you want.
Yes, hold it. Okay, then the next phrase is. We got another fermata, and that's all the music we have. But you can see it's a combination, a variety of closed and open structure. And I think that's all the more time I don't need to spend any more time on that. It is what it is. I don't think you need to know. It's not that important. Okay, so now, we talked about chord structure. Now that is very different than from the spacing between adjacent voices. And I'm going to give you some rules now that you need to follow at all times about how much space is allowed between adjacent voices. And this is something that we'll probably deal with this structure for maybe just a few more classes, and then it'll disappear and go away. But the rules I'm going to give you about spacing between adjacent voices apply from now to the end of your theory study here at this school. So what I'm about to tell you now is super duper important. Not as important as this. This is just fact stuff. Okay. Now, first of all, do not allow any part to cross above the next higher voice or below the next lower voice when it comes to spacing. So if I show you example 5.9 on page 71, rather than me trying to write it out, let me go ahead and increase the size of it. This is an example, these are examples of what not to do. You See how it says no? Do you see in this measure here, do you see how the alto pitch has gone higher than the soprano pitch in the middle chord? How do I know that the alto has gone higher than the soprano?
The stem direction.
Yeah, the stem direction proves it. It tells me. Okay? Because the alto note will always have its stem going down, and the soprano note will always have its stem going up. You can see that they've crossed, and that is never, ever allowed. Okay? You can't take the alto higher than the soprano, or the reverse is true. You can't take the soprano below the alto voice. Okay? Notice in measure B over here, do you see how the tenor has crossed below the bass? That is definitely never allowed. We can see the crossing based on the stem direction. The bass is always supposed to be the lowest sounding voice, have the lowest sounding pitch at all times, and the tenor should not go below. The tenor can share with the bass voice, but it can't go below. Okay? So that's probably self-explanatory, the crossing. Now, the other thing is the actual amount of space between the adjacent voices. Adjacent upper voices must be kept within an octave of each other at all times. At all times. In other words, there should be no more than 1 octave of space between the soprano and the alto pitch ever. There should be no more than an octave of space between the alto and tenor pitch ever. What does that look like? Well, let's see if I can show you over here. This is on page 72. Yeah, let's look at this one. That's good. All right. And then freeze it. Okay. This rule applies. This is a hard and fast rule that always has to be followed with every chord. The soprano and the alto voice, those top two adjacent voices, they always have to be within an octave or less of each other at all times. You see how in the first chord here, the alto is further than an octave, more than an octave away from the soprano note? That is not allowed in this style. It makes for, I don't know what the term is, maybe clumsy sounding voicing, chords that aren't really like balanced very well. Okay. In the middle chord, where's the tenor? What note is the tenor on in the middle chord? The D, right? You see the stem hiding down there? Okay. And do you see how the alto's on an F sharp? Is that D more than an octave away from the F sharp? The answer is yes. Is that allowed? The answer is no. Because the alto voice and the tenor voice are adjacent voices, their two notes always have to be within an octave or less of each other at all times in every single chord we write. Okay? You can't have the alto and the tenor more than an octave apart from each other at any point. That's the rule. Okay? Now, what's the rule about the amount of space allowed between the tenor voice and the bass voice? Well, the good news is there's no restriction there. The tenor voice, the tenor note, can be as far away from the bass note as you want it to. No restrictions at all. And if you look at this one here in the last chord, the G and the bass up to the B and the tenor, those are a tenth apart. That's over an octave. Big deal. That's okay. There's no restriction on the amount of space allowed between the tenor and the bass. In fact, there are some times, I mean it's kind of rare, but let's say I spell a chord like this. Let's do this. Let's say I'm spelling an E minor triad. That spacing between the tenor and the bass is allowed. How far is that, by the way? E up to that other E. It's 2 octaves. Can the tenor be at 2 octaves or more away from the bass? Absolutely. They don't get along very well, right? They're trying to social distance. No. Yeah, there's no restriction. But is this good spacing with the rest of the upper adjacent voices? Is this an octave within an octave of the alto? Yes. Is the alto within an octave or less of the soprano? Yes. That's right. Okay. Yeah. Any questions about this so far? Yeah.
Do basses have to have the root of the chord or not?
Nope. Basses do not have to have the root, right? Because if a chord is an inversion, the bass will have another member of the chord, not the root.
Root position would be bass though, correct?
If a chord is in root position, then the basses would have the root, yes. Because that means the root is the lowest tone. You bet. And for right now, we're only going to be part writing and voice leading and dealing with chords in root position. In fact, we don't get to learn how to part writing chords in inversion until maybe November 6th. So strictly what we're doing right now is all the harmonies we're spelling, the triads and four voices will be in root position, and you double the root. You double the root to get four full voices. Okay, and one more piece of information for you to know, and then we can look at kind of what the homework is going to be like and what you'll need to do. In example 512 on page 72, this is the best place I can find for this information. And again, I would mark page 72 or dog-ear it or something so that you can refer to this whenever you need to. And that is, what about just the overall general range of each of the voices? I mean, if we weren't concerned about the range and we were just writing music however we wanted for all these voices, we might end up accidentally taking sopranos, sky's the limit, just like you took 5,000 ledger lines above the staff. They can't sing that. So, these are the ranges that we're going to work with from now until the end of your theory training. The soprano voice, I don't want you ever writing the soprano voice lower than middle C. I know it, by the way, these are conservative ranges. I know that some sopranos can sing lower than the middle C. I realize that. And some sopranos can sing higher than that G. That's fine. But let's just agree with the book here. These are conservative ranges, but don't write a soprano note ever higher than that G up on the top of the treble staff. What is that? Or this is piano working now. What is that particular range here for soprano? Doesn't go lower than this. Doesn't go higher than that. Even though I know that many sopranos can sing higher than that and lower than that. Okay? Just for the sake of argument, the alto range, let's not write the altos below, that's the G3, that's the bottom of their range. And let's not write them above the D, looks like D5. Okay. In fact, some books will actually take the altos no higher than the C, the C5. Okay, so altos, your general tessitura, don't go lower than that. Probably don't go much higher than that. The tenor voice, never write a pitch for the tenor lower than C3, and never write a pitch higher for the tenor than G4. Okay. So tenor, your basic range is from here to here. And finally, the bass range you can see is there from that low E, one ledger line below the staff, up to middle C. I know many basses can sing higher than middle C, but a lot of basses don't care to sing higher than middle C, and they might be like, who did this? Who wrote this? No, but anyways, basses, there's your low limit, here's your high limit. Now, if any of you sing in choir, you've got to agree that the majority of your notes are within these ranges for your part, aren't they?
Yeah.
So to speak.
Bass can get higher, but
So, now I can think of exceptions, obviously, like for instance, the tenors, do you see how their high range is that G4? I know that in one of the movements of Handel's Messiah, he takes them up a step higher than that to an A. But we'll just agree to use these as conservative ranges for now. Shoot, there was something else I thought I was going to say, and now I'm feeling something. So I must not be that important. All right, let's take a look now at what you're going to be asked to do for homework. And the homework is going to be all out of the workbook. In fact, I can actually do some of these on the board here. I'll take the ones out of the textbook, not the workbook, so I don't duplicate anything. Leave my grand staff here. I'm getting these off of page 73 in your textbook. Let's get a key signature in here, and a key, and here's a Roman numeral, and we've got this, and we've got this, and I've got this. Okay, so you'll be given a problem that might look something like this for the homework. And you're asked to fill in the two inner voices, the alto and the tenor, to complete each root position triad. Now you have to be sure that each note of the triad is represented, and then you also have to follow the spacing conventions, stay within the range of each vocal part, and also follow the structure type that's called for. Whew. That's a lot. Asking too much, Dr. Hawkins. No, I think we can do this. Okay. Well, first of all, we need to find out what notes we need. And that's told us by this. What are the notes of a 6 triad in F major? Well, the root would be D, right? F,
A.
and A. Okay, DFA. If you want to write that down here, that's perfectly fine. You first got to find out what notes you need. Because it's a minor triad, right? Lowercase 6. Okay. Now, there's only 3 notes here. Which of these 3 is going to be doubled? The D, right? Always double the root. In fact, I think the D has already been doubled for us in this problem. There's one in the soprano and one in the bass. So that means I'm going to have to insert an F, either in the alto or the tenor, and I'm going to have to put an A, either in the other voice then, the remaining voice, either the alto or the tenor. But I need to do it so that spacing is good, structure is good, and I'm following the ranges of the voices. I know it's a lot to think about, but. Okay, what does open structure mean? Which two voices are we comparing to get structure now?
The soprano and the tenor.
Good, the soprano and the tenor. And I erased it, but open structure means that the soprano and the tenor are an octave or more apart. Okay? So if I place an F right here, is that going to agree with open structure? No, because now the tenor is less than an octave away from the soprano. So that can't be done. Okay? Well, what do you recommend? What would you like to try? Do you know?
Can you put an F, like, down on
This one?
Yeah.
Okay, let's put it up there, and then we need an A. And where would you put the A? Yeah, okay, but would you put it here, or would you put it a ledger line?
The one on top.
Okay, well, let's take a look at that. I've got all the notes, but do I have an octave or less of space between all my top 3 adjacent voices? No, I don't. How far apart are the alto and the tenor? Aren't they more than an octave apart? Okay. We do have open structure, I would agree. But you can't have the alto and the tenor have to be within an octave or less at all times. So is there another solution?
Put the A.
Okay. How about this? Ooh, I like that. That satisfies everything. It's open structure because the tenor is more than an octave away from the soprano. The soprano and alto are an octave or less apart, which is correct. The alto and tenor are an octave or less apart. And I have all the notes that I need. How about that? Don't worry, you guys will get really good at this with lots and lots of practice. You'll think about different combinations and ways to do it. All right. So that's really, did you have a question?
It's soprano and tenor for open then, right? The
So,
soprano open or closed, it's soprano and tenor, right?
The soprano and tenor, those are the two voices you look at for open versus closed structure. That's right. And they're considered open in this case. Yes. Now, unfortunately, that's all the time we're going to have, but I hope you're starting to get an idea of how you need to complete the assignment for Wednesday. Okay? Refer to, all the information is in chapter 5 of your book if you forget. But it's example 5.2c, just selected exercises, and then it's section D on the same page, page 38. And that's due for Wednesday.
Is there only one correct answer for these, or is it?
No, I think sometimes there are two possible, but you've got to find one that satisfies